This is Jewish Spotlight, a weekly television program presented by Chabad Lubavitch of Long Island, featuring various aspects of modern Jewish life and Jewish culture. Now, here is your host, Rabbi Tuvia Teldin.
Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish Spotlight. Tonight we're going to talk about the high holidays that are coming up for the Jewish people all over the world. And this is a time of the year, it's a very exciting time, and sometimes a very serious time. And there's so many different layers of understanding the meaning behind the high holidays that we could just talk for hours and hours and hours. But the fact is, in Jewish Spotlight, we only have a half hour, so we're going to do two different things during this half hour. First half, we're going to try to talk a little bit about just the customs and the laws, the different aspects of the traditions behind Rosh Hashanah. So you'll be a little bit familiar, if you haven't already learned anything concerning Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, with what goes on in the synagogue and how we can approach the holidays with a proper attitude. Second half, I want to talk a little bit about some of the deeper messages that we get out of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, how it relates to our life, how we can improve our marriage, how it's something that can really make relationships in general, not only with God, but with other human beings, more meaningful and more important and perhaps more successful. So in order to do this, as always, I'd like to ask my wife to join in because, as you'll know, if you haven't heard her yet, she adds a very, very special dimension to the Jewish Spotlight. So, just to get started, Chaya, good evening.
Hello, it's a pleasure.
Okay, good. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the holidays. Why don't we talk about food a little bit? Rosh Hashanah, of course, has many special customs. Families get together, Jews congregate for thousands of years, getting around a Rosh Hashanah table. There are special foods that we eat during that time, which are unique to that time of year. Maybe you can tell us a couple of those also.
Okay, the general theme is to have sweet food. We take the traditional challah bread and we make it round to signify a full year. Instead of dipping it in salt, we dip it this time of year in honey to symbolize having a sweet year. We also, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, put a fish head on the table. I usually turn it so the eyeballs are not staring at me. And this represents the wish that we are the head and not the tail. We serve carrots, or a sweet carrot dish called simis. Yiddish for carrot is merin, and it also hints at the word more, so that we hope that our good deeds are more, obviously, than our negative things that God is paying attention to. And we serve honey cake, something called lekach, again alluding to the idea that we want the year to be a sweet one.
Now, let me ask you a question. Why is it that in Judaism we make such a big thing out of food, that even the foods of the holiday are so much connected? Now, Passover I can understand, because the whole Passover is about not having chametz, not eating any leavened bread. But what is the meaning why all these traditions? Is it just because it's nice to have traditions? Or is it something we're supposed to really put ourselves into and connect to the holiday on a different level? In other words, bring the holiday down from making it somewhat of a spiritual holiday to make it very mundane. We're trying to make this something practical and down to earth, and this is what you're eating should also be affected by the holiday.
I think it's two things. I think that we don't want the tradition just to be something that remains in the synagogue, in the sanctuary, but rather that our home is equally important to celebrating the holiday. We don't just need to limit our relationship with God to the synagogue or to the sanctuary, but rather in our home as well. And also, I find, certainly with children, I guess with all of us, maybe it's the child within, that the traditional foods, when they reappear on the table every year, you say, oh yes, I remember this. I remember when my grandmother, when Bubby used to make these things. So we're bringing the holiday spirit into the home. And then, of course, we know that concept of elevating the edible, of sanctifying something that seems so mundane. So we take the table, which becomes an altar, and the food that we bring on the altar, we are able to offer that to God as well.
Okay, great. Now you've made me a little bit hungry. I'm looking forward to
a good dinner tonight.
In the meantime, I want to talk a little bit about the preparation that goes into Rosh Hashanah. Because as we know, in anything in life, unless you prepare for it with an honest, sincere preparation, you're not going to appreciate it. Rosh Hashanah is no exception. The whole month, in fact, before Rosh Hashanah is called the month of Elul. Since Judaism has a lunar calendar, and Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the new moon. The whole new moon before that is a month called Elul, E-L-U-L. And it's considered to be a month of preparation for Rosh Hashanah, a month of making an accounting of what we accomplished during the year. How were our relationships? How did I do in my marriage? Let's not talk about that now, though.
Isn't the month of Elul a hint to that relationship?
Yes. Thanks for reminding me. Of course, it represents 4 Hebrew words. It's spelled in Hebrew, Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. Ani Lidodi, Vidodi, Li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. In other words, the way we are to God during this month, that in fact will be the way that God will reflect back to us during the high holiday season. So that just going into synagogue and saying, okay, tonight's Rosh Hashanah, get your suits on and your ties or your dresses or whatever it might be, let's go up to shul, I paid for the tickets already, and we're it. There's something missing there, because we're cheating ourselves out of a very special experience. What if you would be going to see some very important person? What if you're going on a business account? What if you're going on an appointment to try to get a major account? Would you just show up at the appointment and say, okay, I'm here? No, you do your preparation, you think about what you're trying to accomplish, you try to figure out what the best approach would be to accomplish your goals. And what is our goal in Rosh Hashanah? Is to really reestablish, reconnect that relationship with God, to make sure it's solid and that it's important, and that God will know that in my heart it's important for me to reconnect on Rosh Hashanah.
I think it's similar to people in business when they are approaching the end of the year, they want to take stock. So you have an inventory, you survey what went out, what came in, and you make a whole cheshbon hanefesh, I think it's called, how would you translate?
An accounting of the soul.
An accounting of the soul, where you say, okay, this is where I've been during the year, this is where I want to go, this is where I fell short, and this is what I want to resolve for the future. So I think that when we compare the Jewish New Year to what we might call the secular New Year, with all the resolutions, I'm going to stop smoking, and I'm going to join Weight Watchers, and I'm going to, but we fall short. In a sense, we have to do that spiritually as well. We have to take stock now, and we have to make an accounting of where we've been and where we want to go. And that is a fabulous preparation.
But it's interesting, the resolutions really only work when a person does make the preparations, because just to wake up one morning and decide I'm going to do something without having the preparations, somehow there's an empty shell there that's not able to give the energy and the vim and vigor, the motivation to be able to have the follow-through. This brings us to another point also, that many people ask, what is the difference between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Rosh Hashanah is 2 days, of course, and you have 2 days of a lot of prayer, and then you have Yom Kippur 7 days later. There are 10 days altogether, 2 and 7, and then the 1 day of Yom Kippur, which also seems to be a day of tremendous and intense prayer. So what's going on here? Why are they so similar? The fact is they're really very different. They're meant to be part of an evolution of our relationship with God. First, the month of accounting, the month of really taking stock, the month of thinking about who am I, where am I, what am I doing in life, where am I going in my life, and my relationships with God and with my family and with other people around me. And then once we've decided that, okay, this is where I'm at, we say, all right, God, it's Rosh Hashanah, I want to reestablish that relationship. I want to make you my king. This is why we talk about the idea of kingship many times in the Machzor. The Machzor is the book. There are many, many different types of Machzors out. All of them deal with the many hundreds of pages of prayers that we read during the course of the holiday ceremony, the holiday services. And once we've established that resolution to have a solid relationship with God, then we go through the process of the 10 days of tshuva, the 10 days of repentance, which are days of real introspection, days of real regret for perhaps things we've done against God, or in a parallel sense, against other relationships that we might have in life. It goes through the same type of stages in any relationship. We decide we want to have the relationship, renew the relationship, we decide that, oh, if that's the case, I'm going to renew it, then there are certain things I have to make up for, because I really compromise this relationship in certain ways. And then we go into Yom Kippur with a true sense of regret for what we've done and the resolution for the future to make sure that those mistakes should never be repeated.
I think that, if I'm not mistaken, Rosh Hashanah is the time of year when we crown God as the king. We proclaim his sovereignty, so to speak.
Now, what does that mean? To most people, of course, in America we don't have a king. Most people hear about and read in the Machzor all Rosh Hashanah about the king. Explain to our audience, what is this king? Why are we so hung up on calling Hashem a king, calling God a king?
I think one of the things is that that kingship means that there's a sovereign. When there's a sovereign, there has to be subjects. I have to subjugate my will, which is a very foreign concept to many people.
That's very hard for many people.
Absolutely. What do you mean I have to give up my will or put aside my will for someone else? But that is exactly the idea. Sometimes, many times, life doesn't give me what I want. And if I've never experienced subjugating my will or facing disappointments or frustrations, putting aside my will for the benefit of the greater, of the bigger picture, person has a problem.
But
So,
if I could just add also, because you're bringing up a very powerful point as far as self-transformation as well, which means that if, let's say, I know that I had to subjugate my will, that term sounds very powerful, very overbearing to many people. If we talk about it in terms of, listen, I know that there's a right and there's a wrong, and I know that my will sometimes is not in the right. I know that sometimes the best thing even for me and the situation, my children, my business, whatever it might be, would be to do the right thing. What does that translate as? It means really being able to subjugate my will to a higher will. In other words, realize that I am not perfect, and realize that I have certain hang-ups, or that I have certain ulterior motives or weaknesses
Sure.
that drive me in one direction, or inhibitions or needs that perhaps aren't even rational in a certain degree. When I lessen the drive to fulfill my will, and I'm able to make room for what's right and what I know to be right, which really represents in many cases God's will, then really it elevates us. It brings us to a higher state. It's able to elevate our lives to make it more meaningful, more purposeful, and more in line with a higher reality of what God wants from us. Go on, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
I just had to get that in.
I think one of the customs also on Rosh Hashanah is the ceremony called Tashlich, where we go to a live body of water, which reminds us of the coronation of a king in ancient times that used to take place near a live body of water. And one of the reasons is that as we cannot live without water, and water is constantly flowing, Torah or the 5 books of Moses are compared to water that we cannot live without.
Mm-hmm.
And so we, in a sense, allude to that coronation of God standing by a live body of water.
Right, now in continuation with that, I want to bring out the shofar, which of course I'm sure almost all of you have seen. This is a ram's horn. Ram's horn is chosen for many reasons, partly because it was the ram that was chosen by Abraham instead of Isaac at the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac. And of course this is a horn that represents also coronation, because what takes place at a coronation, the horn is blown.
You blow trumpets to
Exactly, to be
summon
able
the people.
to summon the people, and to symbolize that we're in the presence of greatness, and to call that greatness to our presence. Now, there's something very interesting about the shofar, though, that distinguishes it as opposed to any horn. A horn usually is straight. A shofar must be bent, and it must be bent in such a way where you're blowing it where it's bent up. Why? It has to be bent to show that we're bending our will, just along the lines of what we were talking about. And we're bending our will, our personal will, subjugating it,
Upward.
that it has to go up. So when we have the shofar, we're not only blowing to coronate God as our king, accepting a higher authority, accepting that some higher intelligence greater than my intelligence, as much as my 3-pound brain might know. I can probably imagine that God has at least a 5 or 6-pound brain. I mean, maybe even more than that, but at least a little bit more intelligence than me. And I can listen to something, even listen to God's word, even if I don't understand perhaps everything about what God has said in the Torah and the Bible.
Also, I think it's important to point out that no animal is killed in order to procure the horn, and that it must come from a kosher animal,
Right.
and that we specifically do not use a cow's horn, a bull horn, so as not to remind us of the historical story of the golden calf. We don't want to allude to anything negative at a time when we're trying to evoke God's mercy.
Right. Now, I'd like to blow this a little bit, but beforehand I want to explain what the different notes are. So when you go to synagogue and you hear the shofar blown, you'll understand what's going on here. Now, the Torah itself, we see, the Bible tells us very clearly the type of shofar that should be blown, and also a little bit about the notes of the shofar when it is blown. But in general, there are 3 different types of notes that are blown. There is one long note.
That's called a tekiah.
Right, which means somewhat of just a cry out to God, a coronation, a feeling of wanting to connect. Then you have what's called shvarim, which are 3 notes. And that is a little bit more of a broken cry. It represents a little bit more of a broken heart that a person has. Because, of course, in order to subjugate ourselves, in order to reach higher, to break through that glass ceiling that often restricts us or limits us from being able to feel real regret for our mistakes, or to be able to make ourselves a better person, improve ourselves, we need to have somewhat of a broken heart. A broken heart meaning not that we have to feel down.
Not in a negative sense,
no,
not in a guilty,
very uplifting.
Right,
it can be a very liberating, very cleansing, very tremendously liberating type of feeling as well. And then the third type of note that you're going to hear when you go to synagogue is what's called the trua. Now the trua is a lot of broken notes. Trua represents a truly broken heart, a heart that's broken down to the essence, to the core.
When you're sobbing sometimes and you just can't stop that crying,
exactly.
where it goes repeats
just like
and
that.
repeats and repeats.
Almost like a broken sobbing. And what is the explanation behind that? Because sometimes the greatest growth can take place after a person really has reached that bottom. I like to say sometimes you have to hit bottom in order to be able to really start to grow. Similarly, let's say, for instance, take a seed. A person takes a seed, has a beautiful appearance perhaps. What do? They throw it into the ground. Sits in the ground, it's there for a day, a week, a month, don't see anything. And perhaps all of a sudden you start to see little sprouts come up. What's going on? The seed had to rot. The seed went through a whole process of rotting over the course of that period of time. And as a result, it was then liberated from its outer shell. The outer shell broke, and when the outer shell broke, then the essence of the seed was able to come forth. Similarly, sometimes on Rosh Hashanah, we need to have that feeling to make a true connection to God, of being able to break that outer shell that so many of us have, and it's just natural.
Well, those are our defenses, those are that's our personality, that protects us.
Exactly, and that's perhaps the many different hats that we have. It's the public persona that many people have in their jobs and their businesses, dealing with people, and sometimes it's very hard for people not to bring that public persona back to the house. A guy comes back and or a woman is in charge of an office, or has other people working with them or under them, and they come back and they'll feel the same way. What do you mean, I should take out the garbage, or I have to do other things? So there's all types of dynamics going on internally in the person, which parallel the type of dynamics that we have to have in our approach to God before Rosh Hashanah. So let's do that third note of the
trua.
Right, the trua. And then, after the long combination of many of these different three notes, at the very end we have what's called a Tia Gedola, the long tekiah, the long note, which is a note of liberation, a note of victory, a note that we really have made the steps necessary to make that special connection. And in particular, on Yom Kippur, we have that tekiah gedola, that long sound of the shofar, to be able to represent also our hopes and wishes for redemption of the whole Jewish people, of a return to Jerusalem, a whole Jerusalem, and where Mashiach will be able to bring us back. And it also says that when Mashiach comes, that Elijah the prophet will blow the shofar to herald the coming of Mashiach, because Mashiach also, the Messiah, is considered to also be like a king. So let's hear that tekiah gedola.
Pretty powerful sound.
It can go right into the heart, get you right where it counts. Incidentally, for anybody who's interested, there are many shofar factories that we have throughout Long Island that Chabad sponsors, and many synagogues, for Hebrew schools, Jewish Arts Festival in Comac, and for many other types of events. We'll be having in the Comac Chabad Center on September 17th, a special presentation showing people how shofar is made. So if you're interested in knowing more about a shofar and how it's made, bring the kids, come down yourself, and I'm sure it'll be an experience that you won't forget.
There's a beautiful story of a young boy who traveled to a synagogue for the first time. He grew up in Europe on a farm, and his father never thought he was old enough or mature enough to go to the big city. But when he was about 9, his father took him on a carriage, and they traveled to the city to spend the high holy days. And he arrived there just in time to change and to go to the synagogue. And the boy looked with awe at the majesty and the magnitude. He had never seen so many people before, and the noise and the sounds. And he watched everybody pray, and he was saddened because growing up on the farm, he had not had a proper Jewish education, and he did not know how to read Hebrew. And he sat in the back of the synagogue, and he began to cry. How will he speak to God? How will I communicate? How will I tell God that I love him? And he looked at the prayer book and he was unable to decipher the letters. And he thought and he thought and he said, what could I offer God? What is the best that I have? And so he decided, in the innocence of youth, to share with God his gifts. And that was the ability to make the sounds of the barnyard animals. And so at the top of his voice, he began to crow like a rooster, cuckoo-ree-coo. One could only imagine the disruption that it caused in the synagogue. The rabbi turned and everybody thought he was going to signal that he should be tossed down, when instead the rabbi said, the Baal Shem Tov, the holy leader of the Hasidic movement, said, bring him up to the front. I want him to stand next to me. And people were shocked. They were surprised. Could you imagine a child acting out in the synagogue? The rabbi says, come, let him stay by me. Afterwards, his disciples said, what was that? And the Baal Shem Tov explained that at that very moment, there was a decree issued against the Jewish people, and the scales were balanced. And the heavens were fighting it out, the powers of good and the powers of darkness. And that little boy's sincere offering, the prayer, like you say, that came from the depth of his heart, tipped the scales. And the Baal Shem Tov said that now the Jews will be sealed for a good year. So I love that story because it indicates to us that even if we don't know the prayers, we don't know when to stand up, we don't know when to sit down, we're not certain, we can't follow, we can't read Hebrew that fast, God wants us to pray in sincerity and from the essence of our being, and that is as dear to him as the loftiest prayers.
It's a beautiful story, very true. And I think that's an important thing that everybody should realize, that the prayer is a mitzvah of the heart. Prayer is a commandment of the Torah, to pray and to pour out your heart to God. Of course, prayer in the synagogue is very important. Being part of a congregation is very important. But essentially, the mitzvah, as it's described in the Torah, is that at any point where a person feels that they want to call out to God, they want to talk to God, they want to ask of God, feel free to do so. And that really is a tremendous, tremendous sense of connection. Because the word prayer itself in Hebrew is tefillah. It doesn't mean really prayer. Prayer is not a good translation, because prayer connotes more of a coming to request. I'm going to pray to God for something. I'm going to ask God for something. Prayer in Hebrew, tefillah, means to connect, to make a connection. So when you go to synagogue, go to try to make a connection. Even if you can't, as my wife said, keep up with all of the praying and you don't know where you are and where the congregation is, don't lose sight, don't lose focus of the main purpose, which is that you went to synagogue to connect to God, to really dig into your heart, to take all those shells off and to make sure that you get down to the essence. Because unfortunately in our lives, being very busy and being, running around with all different types of responsibilities, we don't always get a chance to connect to the essence. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are considered to be the holiest times of the year. The times that the innermost part of the soul is most revealed, most intense, that the fire is most heated. And that's the time that we can really try to make the connection that we desire to make so many times during the year. In fact, as far as the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, used to say that this month, in fact, as we go into Rosh Hashanah, as we approach Rosh Hashanah, is a time of Melech B'Soda. The king is in the field. I want to explain to everybody, because you explained so well what the king is all about. What does it mean that the king is in the field?
I think that 11 months of the year, as the analogy goes, the king resides in the palace. And there's protocol, and there's rules, and there's guards, and there's secretaries, and there's appointments that one must go through in order to access the king. But 1 month of the year, so to speak, the king puts on common clothes, and he leaves the palace and he travels among the countryside and is extremely approachable and accessible. And this is the time of the year when we can go over without any appointments, without any blockages, and just ask the king. I have a different question, though. I know we're nearing the end, but my favorite holiday of the year, if we're allowed to have that, is Sukkot, which comes after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it seems almost opposite of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which are so serious, and this is a holiday of joy.
Right, and this is such an important holiday, because I know there are many people who might go to synagogue just Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but believe me, if I could ask you for anything of your Judaism, anything whatsoever, if you go to shul those 2 or 3 days of the year, is to add on the other day and to go Simchas Torah. Why do I say this? Because, number one, we were left with such a serious sense of what Judaism is all about when we're there for Yom Kippur. Such a heavy day, such a solemn day.
Right.
And to leave and feel that Judaism is so solemn is really, not putting things in proper perspective. What happens in a relationship? You first bind, and then you perhaps say you're sorry, and you reunite, but afterwards you celebrate.
Right, there has to be a time to celebrate
exactly.
together.
There has to be that celebration. So without the celebration, somehow it's incomplete. You know, a chair can't stand on two legs, so you can't have just two holidays that's going to make your year, your Jewish year, stand on its own two feet.
That's a great
you
analogy.
need three, at least three, in order to have a strong, solid balance, in order to be able to go on with the rest of the Jewish year. So to go to synagogue for Simchas Torah, which comes just 13 days or so after Yom Kippur, is to be able to really bring completion to the whole season. And it's so important. So even though the Rebbe, interesting enough, of all the Jewish leaders, complimented people who went to shul those 2 or 3 days of the year, the Rebbe came out with tremendous praise that a person takes off, or a person perhaps even for whom Judaism is not a major priority, for whom it might be very expensive to get tickets to go to synagogue. We have to pay money in order to be able to take off from work, number one, in order to buy suits, or buy clothes for the family, have a big feast. So for a person for whom Judaism is not a priority, this is in many ways a great sacrifice.
It's a beautiful thing when people do that.
Sure, and the Rebbe, who always looked for the positive in every situation, every single person, every possible circumstance, would always find that this is a great thing that a Jew is willing to do that. But one thing that the Rebbe also always said is that we always have to try to grow. Life should be a growing process. It should be a process of really constantly trying to go from one level to the next. And in our Judaism as well, there are so many infinite amount of levels that we can grow. One level to try to grow in, it would be to take the family for that fourth or third day, depending on the case, to go to Simchas Torah and celebrate Sukkot, because it's such a beautiful and such a happy, such a joyous holiday. We'd be cheating ourselves and our family and our children if we wouldn't be able to have the opportunity to partake in it. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it's such an important thing. We've had shows in the past about Sukkot also. Try whatever you can to get a feel for it, because it's truly an experience to behold. Excuse me. Okay, we're just going to close up now. Coming to a close. I got a little bit of something in my throat. But fact is, you can all partake in any of the holidays by visiting a local Chabad center, visiting your local synagogue, having any type of experience of Judaism. This is the time of the year that you can do it. This is the time of the year that you can really make a special attempt to connect your family and connect everybody around you with something Jewish. Because there's so much Judaism in the air during this time of the year. Don't cheat yourself of it. In the meantime, I want to also mention to you that we have a new address on the show, because we just opened up a new center in Comac, a center which will be able to allow us to expand our programs and activities to a great degree. We're now at 318 Veterans Highway in Comac. We have much larger facilities, and we want to invite you to come down to enjoy the holidays with us, to come visit us for any of our many programs or classes, special classes and programs we're going to have before the holidays. We're having a special program with Label Wolf, a well-known Kabbalist, who will be speaking on September 14th in the evening. And of course, the high holiday season is one that's filled with a lot of joy, a lot of explanations also, and a lot of different types of inner meaning behind the holidays to be able to keep everybody busy. So take care of yourself. Have a great, sweet holiday. Let's hope that God should wish you and your loved ones health and happiness and everything that your heart could possibly desire. And Chaya, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you at dinner tonight, and we'll look forward to many more happy occasions together. God should only bless you with the best. Take care of yourself and go out there, do a mitzvah, some mitzvah for the holidays to make your world a better place. Shalom.